Hello Internet, and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We're a channel all about tabletop gaming, and today we're going to check in with the playtest so far for the playtest classes released by Paizo in anticipation of their new book coming out in July 2021, Secrets of Magic. The two classes that were released for playtest are the Magus and the Summoner, and both are pretty different. You can watch our video, it'll be linked somewhere around here, where we talked about the playtest, our expectations, our initial reactions, but now we've had a chance to play a couple of games. One of them was pretty much just a straightforward playtest at level 5, where I wanted to specifically test the two new classes' performance in a party that featured other classes that are sort of filling comparable roles. So for the Magus, I had a War Priest specializing in Channel Smite with spell lists pretty much built to do that. And the other character was an Eldritch Trickster, using an Arcane multi-class as part of that class, so not technically a multi-class, using cantrips and the sneak attack with spell class feature that's part of rogues, and that the Eldritch Trickster can take good advantage of, getting access to it at a lower level. So that's what the Magus was up against. Full disclosure, our Magus was a ranged built Magus. The player felt that he felt that the amount of mobility was a little too low, so he wanted to test the version of the class that had the least need to reposition, and therefore theoretically, taking the least penalty from the poor mobility of the 3-action spell strike. Acknowledging that, so take this with the acknowledgement that he may not have wasted as many spell slots because the shooting star version, the range attack version of the Magus, loses spells on a miss, whereas the other two hold them for up to the end of the next turn to try again and get those hits. So, so take that into consideration when we talk about the performance. In addition to that playtest, I also, for our online usual game, I had our Sorcerer, who was a Magus in first edition before we converted, rebuild her character, and that was Sarah, my wife, had her rebuild her Sorcerer as a Magus. And then we had our Monk, who... you can watch the video on Jimmy. We'll link it somewhere. I'm not even going to begin to describe how we arrived at what we arrived, what that character is, how it was converted, what it was in first edition, how it was converted into second edition. Suffice it to say, Monk worked pretty well, but it was built very much on the chassis of a Summoner's Eidolon in first edition. So we had Jimmy the Snake rebuilt as an Eidolon, using the Leshy familiar that he had picked up from a Druid dedication as his quote-unquote summoner, with his monstrous character being the Eidolon. So it was a little weird. We didn't roleplay anything about it. We just, everybody just sort of shielded their eyes to the weirdness, and we just tried to continue as best we could. Part of that was him just keeping the tiny Leshy on his back the entire fight. That one, because it was just part of our normal game, I didn't want to upset our game any more than I needed to, so admittedly we only had about 2 rounds of combat. So really, we didn't find a whole lot there except to confirm that some ideas were still there, but definitely aided by the additional feats. So let's go ahead and get into it here. For our playtest level 5 adventure, what I did was just 2 combats, one after the other. The first combat I ran as a moderate encounter, just to check and see what the average combat would look like for these characters. And then the second combat was an extreme encounter. And for those that aren't super familiar with building encounters in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, that means that the party is not really expected to survive, or, if they do, casualties are expected. And it did not disappoint. So let's get into the overall performance. So the Magus, over 11 rounds of combat, the Magus made 7 attempts at Spell Strike. Of those 7 attempts, twice the strike and spell succeeded. Twice. And to be fair, the second time that it succeeded was a crit with a spell slot. So the Magus wound up dealing 54 damage at level 5. That is more than respectable. The other attack dealt, I believe, 33 damage. Overall, it dealt 147 damage. So it's a very swingy sort of thing, which is as expected. It also wasted 3 entire turns where nothing happened. It could not get into position to spell strike once, and then twice it missed everything, even when hasted with the extra attack at the end. That's rough. Overall, the player felt like having to devote a full 3 actions to be able to do what the book seemed to think that he should be doing. Was very restrictive. Even if he'd had the free movement from the sliding caster, he would have had to have been in melee, which is its own difficulties and challenges, provoking potential attacks of opportunity, which 2 of the monsters of the, I think, 9 or 10 that they fought total over those 2 encounters did have. But it wouldn't have been enough, even still. I mean, he was playing the version that didn't rely on the movement, and he still had trouble finding times to attempt that. He also, expressed concerns, and why he picked the ranged one was that while the free movement with the slide casting is nice, he wouldn't have been able to, enter into parry situation if he had a weapon that allowed it. He wouldn't have been able to demoralize or feint, which are things that, he would have liked to have done. He's a very savvy player, so for him, I know that he was thinking strategically and about getting the most out of his class, and having those extra actions to set yourself up for success, is what would push him over the edge of getting that, possibly that critical hit with the attack, and then a potential boost to a saving throw with the spell. But because his actions were so limited, even once he was hasted, he can only use that haste action for certain actions. Even then, he wouldn't have been able to set himself up. He would have had to rely on the party to do that for him. That's important because one of the things he was up against was the Arcane Trickster. The Arcane Trickster is able to, with a 2nd level feat, is able to get sneak attack with spell attack rolls. So, that means, cantrips are on the table. It only had 1 first level spell slot. So compared to the Magus's 2 third levels and 2 second levels, seems like it should have been much less capable. But over those same 11 rounds, the Arcane Trickster landed 8 of its 9 spell sneak attacks. And because there's only 1 barrier of success, you don't have to succeed with the hit and with the spell. That means that all 8 of those 9 were successful in adding the sneak attack damage to the spell attack damage. So it dealt a total over the 11 rounds of 184 damage, which is about 35 more than the Magus did. Only using cantrips, I don't believe he ever used his first level spell. Maybe he did, but without trying to do I'm not sure. I'll I don't think I have that in my notes. But he was able to set himself up consistently for that sneak attack by having that extra action to feint, to move around, freely, and, otherwise just keep better positioning, which is something that, again, the Slidecaster Magus could do, but that's only one of the three subclasses of Magus could do that. The other thing that he was up against, that our Magus was up against, and this was not a versus situation, of course, this is just, they were all trying to work together to provide the most success, and we were tracking those bonuses. The War Priest. So I think the War Priest is something, in addition to the Arcane Trickster, or the Eldritch Trickster, who is a class that is able to, use its class abilities with cantrip spells very effectively, while also having a full kit of a rogue, not missing out on any rogue progression. This is a class that is able to reliably use spells with its martial class features. So I put the quotes on the wrong emphasis there on its martial class features. So I think that's why I chose that. That's a great comparison. And, even with the cantrips, it out-damaged because it was able to crit with just one roll and set itself up for, not just to use its ability, but to use its ability with a flanking situation or, an otherwise flat-footed. So it was always, functionally, always getting the +2, the 10% chance to succeed or critically succeed, which was, as we saw, very strong, very useful, very savvy use of those abilities, and what led to its greater success and its overall greater damage output. The War Priest, on the other hand, was very much the frontliner of its 12 attacks that it took, because it was able to take much more advantage of, attacking multiple times. Of the 12 attacks that it took, it landed 9 of them. I won't say that that is the standard, the expectation, but that is what happened. And in all, even though we, and this is very interesting, even though we had designed her, and Sarah played this one, my wife, who you saw in the video where we talked about it, and many others on the channel, but she was trying to use Channel Smite, which is what she was built to do. Most of her spells were devoted to it. A few heals so that she could keep the party up, and a few status removals that were set up so that she could, to illustrate how well she could be a battle, striking class or character, and also still fill these other roles for the party that the Magus sort of can't do. So even though she was built and designed and her goal going in was to do that, what she found is that even though Channel Smite's only a 2-action activity, it was hard for her to position herself to get that out. So she only was able to Channel Smite 2 of these rounds. Now, her build was a 2-handed weapon, a maul, a D12, and she spent her wealth by level on an attack, or on a potency and striking rune, so she was doing 2d12 damage, and she had an armor potency rune as well, and not much else in terms of items, because she had spent 260 over 270 or whatever it was gold, versus the Magus, who had purchased a +1 striking weapon, bow, as well as a staff, hoping to get some more spell casts out, which unfortunately did not come up. But I believe, a Staff of Fire, which is the 3rd level staff, cost him 50 gold, which, while it left him with enough gold for, he had like an Onyx dog, to help him, out with harrying enemies, mostly just sort of acting as, a body on the field. But so he had that, and just spending the 50 or 60 gold or whatever it was for that staff meant that he didn't have enough for the armor potency. But it's a difference of +1, -1 to AC, so not a huge difference there. The big thing is that, we're talking a D12 weapon that, had he been a Magus and he wanted to use a big weapon like that, he wouldn't have had the spells, the slide casting, so he wouldn't have been able to get in position. even with that movement, because, like I said, the War Priest, who only needed 2 actions to use her ability and was able to move freely, still had trouble getting in position to have 2 actions left to strike once she got there, because these were enemies that were not keen on allowing them to get close. They were very much, for the second, the longer encounter, it was mostly a game of keep away while, you know, these bad guys are trying to do this thing. Spoiler, it was summon a Chul. Chul? Cool? Whatever. Chuul. A big, nasty monster that is sufficiently Cthulhian for the cultists that were doing it, and a great CR7, or a great level 7 monster to challenge my level 5 party with. So she, with her 2 action, was still having trouble, but she had the bigger weapon, so she was able to hit 9 out of 12 times, thanks to, you know, the flanking with the Animal Companion and the Eidolon, as well as she and the Eldritch Trickster were getting great benefit out of that, which admittedly the Magus did not, because he was using ranged attacks, which certainly would have helped him. So the War Priest, over the 11 rounds of combat and 12 attack rolls, only did 2 channels. So when it was all over, she still had 3 third-level harms. She chose Harming Font with the Harming Hands feat to get D10s out of that instead of D8s. Again, trying to match as close as possible that feel of a magical martial striker. She had 2 status-removing spells left at 2nd level, and she had a 1st and 3rd level healing spell left after using a 2nd level healing spell, I think. And she had 1 1st level harm remaining as well. So while she was using slots, whereas the Magus, had quite a few, I should talk about that. So the Magus wound up using mostly cantrips, but did burn through 3 of its spells, once for haste, 2 for attempted spell strikes. Only 1 of those spell strikes worked. The rest of the spell strikes were used with cantrips. So the Magus walked out of there with 1 3rd or 4th level spell, I'm not sure, remaining in the tank, which means that if we'd continued on for a 3rd encounter, which is not, unheard of for this game, which is designed around 3 to 5 encounters a day, then he would have been left with very little options, versus the War Priest, who admittedly built with fewer options in general, but still had more options remaining at the end of these fights than the Magus, because she still had a couple of heal spells, one of them very powerful. She still had 3 chances to use her harm. She had 16 charisma, so she had 4 of those. I apologize. She did have 3 of the harms left. So she had 3 of her biggest hits still left in the tank. She still had 1 lower level hit. So even if she had done twice as many encounters, there's a fair chance that she still would have had enough left in the tank for the 4th and final encounter. And she dealt a total of 212 damage over those 9 attacks. She did get a 36 and 41 damage with the 2 channel smites that she landed, and averaged about 20-ish, 25 damage with most of her other attacks. 2d8 plus, or 2d12 plus strength, will get you pretty easily to 20 damage. She was very effective. And then you compare that to the Magus, who, yes, is theoretically, you got free strikes. Unlimited free is all well and good, but you're not going to have unlimited encounters, and the War Priest proved that by just managing it, she was still able to get 1 big hit off per fight. Tried more, but would have been able to have a long day there using these abilities. How much is unlimited free when the War Priest, their limited is still, she still had 6 total possible uses of that ability throughout the day. And because she's rolling d10s and d12s, even though she might be, one of those is a 1st level spell, she's still competing very well for damage output. I mean, she beat both the Trickster and the Magus, all the while still being able to do a total of 26 healing to the party that she did. That is strong, no matter how you look at it. She outperformed. That's the bottom line. You know, even if you assume some level of variation, I think that we can say without question that the Magus, Arcane Trickster, and the War Priest are all performing similarly with the tools that they have. But the difference is that both the War Priest and the Arcane Trickster could continue those encounters, whereas the Magus was down to, I'm assuming, one more haste for the day. They both were more effective using their ability because they didn't have to succeed twice to get that effect off. And on top of that, they both had a lot more character options outside of, you know, this combat striking feature. The rogue having several skill feats, you know, and being able to use sneak attack with the weapons, you know, if spells weren't what they wanted to do, and the War Priest being able to remove those conditions from the party if they had come up, and being able to heal the party. And if she had decided to use a one-handed weapon instead of the maul, she could have had a shield block and potentially, you know, really upped the party's chances of survival in what turned out to be a very deadly encounter. So, for me right now, the way that the Magus is working is, it does work. It's just not as effective as other Gish classes that already exist in the Eldritch Trickster and the War Priest. And not only is it not as effective, it doesn't have as much utility that the War Priest is getting with its spell slots and the Eldritch Trickster is getting with its skill feats to carry itself outside of that. And it just doesn't have the spell slots to do what it needs to do. It really felt like, which is I think counter to what was intended, it really felt like more spells to boost the limited effectiveness of the striking spell as it exists would have been better than trying to use those spells for big damage novas, which, you know, again is theoretically the goal of the class, is to be as devastating as possible with those striking spells. But it probably would have been better off, unfortunately, using those big spells to buff its accuracy or debuff its enemies, and then just using cantrips to deliver those spells. So what does that mean? That means that for me, at least, I think that we need to be basing how striking spell works on both the Eldritch Trickster and the War Priest, because, you know, one is a level 4 feat with the War Priest, the other is a level 2 feat that the Eldritch Trickster gets that turns on their Gish options, which felt satisfying for the players. The player who's playing the Eldritch Rogue had never played rogues, never cared for rogues, had a great time. My wife, she prefers spellcasters in general, and the War Priest, while technically a spellcaster, was very much built as a melee striker, just happening to use spells to do so, and she had a blast. She had a great time. She felt very powerful, very satisfied with the mechanics of that class that was designed to only do a fraction of what that class is capable of, specifically to test that playstyle against the playstyle of the Magus. This is bad news for the current version of the Magus. So I think turning the Magus into a 2-action, turning Spell Strike into either a free action that just delivers the spell with a strike instead of a spell attack roll is the way to go, or, you know, into a 2-action activity that burns a spell and applies the damage from the spell, like how Channel Smite works. I think that's the way to do it. I understand that with the way the class is built, that could make it too powerful, but I think that's where we need to build the balance from in the class, and I hope that's the way that Pathfinder does it. The 4 slots is pretty iffy. I don't think that needs to change if Spell Strike with cantrips works viably. It's something that happens more than 2 in 7 attempts, which is what we saw overall with our other game. 3 out of 8 attempts. is not encouraging. So, you know, hopefully we see them balance that mechanic around, you know, or balance the rest of the class around this mechanic of 2 actions with 1 barrier of success. Because 2 barriers of success and the clunky, limited number of actions. I mean, I said in the other video, it's counter to everything that Pathfinder 2nd Edition and the 3-action economy is, which is this idea of variations in how you use your turn. And by having your core class feature, the thing that is theoretically making you do this instead of just cast the spell regularly and then follow it up with an attack or not even, it's something that is discouraging, is not working. So hopefully we can balance around that. It's, I think, a great flavor class. The feats are really, really interesting and good, but they're just, the chassis is not there. I know that there is some theorizing that the reason that Spell Strike is so weak is to, is because of the conscientiousness of how multiclassing may work, how we may see, a fighter with Spell Strike who is now at earlier level, who is functionally then a legendary spellcaster by level 13, is too strong, we'll say. And so that could be a reason for the limitation. The other thing that I've seen is just crits in general being dangerous. So, I would say, have a situation where, like the Barbarian Rage, you're getting the rage without the instinct benefits, or some of the instinct benefits. Say like, okay, like maybe you're getting the Spell Strike feature, but maybe within each of the syntheses, that's where we're making up for the, getting it down to 1 attack roll, or getting it so that the spell sticks around. I would, given what I've seen, considering that the cantrips are the majority and they're things that you don't feel bad wasting, and that as it is, you're wasting those spell slots anyway when you're using them with the current build, I wouldn't mind seeing the hold on to the spell, the spell staying charged on a missed strike. I wouldn't mind seeing that go away. From what I've seen, it's most effective with cantrips anyway. And the current build, it seems like you should be using those spells to buff yourself anyway, not wasting them on a missed spell strike. So maybe that's the way to go. Take away that aid on a miss, and then maybe add more riders that are sort of already there with the spell shroud and the bespell weapon. Make it so that those are still in effect, even if it's a cantrip and even if it misses, so that even when you miss and you waste, your whole turn, you're still getting something out of it. Or, like I said, just improve that action economy so that rather than having to invent this fix with slide casting that only works for one of the 3 subclasses, and rather than just applying slide casting to all, let's just do the simple thing and make it a 2-action activity. Give it the full, penalty, so that, say that casting the spell and making the strike is the equivalent in terms of, focus and attention to making 2 attack rolls. So now you're going to go ahead and take the 2-action penalty to your 3rd action. So that way we're dissuading this caster from just making a 3rd attack, which is really what would be setting up its damage potential. So if we're saying the spell is expended hit or miss by the end of your turn, and you're taking a multi-attack penalty as if you'd taken 2 attacks already. Now, you do still have a second chance with your spell strike if you miss the spell, so it might not be wasted, but you can't just swing away forever, which is, I think, a false balancing point that some people are seeing, where they're saying, like, okay, yes, your chances of succeeding are low, but you get so many chances. The bottom line is, you're just talking about getting so many chances to succeed with the hit. You still only get 1 chance to succeed with the spell. And that chance is still lower than the average spellcaster. So I think that's a false balance point that doesn't really play out. All this is, again, just to say, I hope that we see a 2-action single barrier of success version of Spell Strike and alter the rest of the mechanics however you need to make that fit and make that multi-class not be overpowered on some other classes, because the bottom line is this class should be able to do its thing regularly and not feel like its core feature, the Spell Strike, is a less optimal option that is only sometimes good, which is how it feels right now. And most classes do not have that problem. Most classes feel like my go-to is good in most situations, but some situations, other options are better. In this, it feels like this is the worst option that I only take when the better options don't present themselves. And that's not good. So that's the Magus. That's how I feel about it. I think there's a lot of potential there. I do hope that we see some big rebalancing to the core mechanic and balance around that, and I think we could have a really solid, fun, entertaining class. Now on to the Summoner. So the Summoner was an interesting class. Unlike the Magus, my players felt like the Summoner was doing its job. It was against an Animal Companion Druid as the comparison, and we felt like it was effective. It landed about as many hits. Let me see here. The Summoner hit 5 of 10 attacks. All of them were with the Eidolon. It dealt 92 damage total, which is not terrible. It did take 65 damage, and before the player ended up dismissing the Eidolon and fleeing what was, like I said, a severe encounter when the War Priest, Magus, and Eldritch Trickster all went down within a round of each other. So it only used one of its spell slots, but the actual Summoner really took no meaningful actions. All it was doing was reinforcing or boosting the Eidolon round to round and spending actions to give the Eidolon actions. So the Eidolon did a great job of acting as a flank machine, taking up good space and dealing fine damage. Definitely not the best damage on the field. Probably, in fact, the lowest, almost the lowest damage. But that shared HP pool and the shared actions is what really seemed to hurt it, making it feel like you had the same rote actions every single round that, while they worked, were not very fulfilling and were also not very impressive. It was up against an Animal Companion Druid. That Animal Companion Druid, this was the player's first time playing anything in 2nd edition. He's the actual DM of the game where I get to be a player. And so for him, it was exciting. He'd never played anything in 2nd edition. He really enjoyed it. He dealt 89 damage and inflicted a status effect with a combination of Animal Companion attacks, which were not terribly successful, but the support action was. Spells and thrown weapons, landing a total of 6 out of the 12 attacks, so about 50-50 accuracy with the Summoner, which is, for 2nd edition spellcasters, about what you're expecting, honestly, a lot of times. He burned through about half of his spell slots, so he still had a lot of Adventuring Day left. His Animal Companion did die, and so that's when the Druid used a utility spell to escape. So the Summoner, so they both had their Animal Companion and Eidolon out, tanking those hits. The Summoner, who was also losing health with its Eidolon, got down to single digits, decided to cut and run once it had seen the writing on the wall with the frontline characters. The Animal Companion Druid saw his creature go down, saw his frontliners go down, and used, I'm not sure the actual spell, something in the vein of Expeditious Retreat, and booked out. So they are the only ones that survived the extreme encounter to live and fight another day. And then for our level 15 game, he was able to get off 500 and some damage with the Chain Lightning against some dragon-scarred undead. But I mean, they have a very weak reflex save, so it was able to go all the way around. It was just blind luck, really, and good taking advantage of that luck and positioning, and then a lot of mediocre to bad rolls with those undead. But it was something, while impressive, that any spellcaster with an 8th level slot could have done. Overall, compared to how he usually played, he saw less damage overall and much fewer options in terms of mobility. As I said, he was playing a monk. So in terms of mobility and tactics and setting up for yourself and other players, he had much fewer options. Every action by the summoner was taken, aside from that one spell, Chain Lightning, was taken to make the Eidolon perform the way that it needed to, and keep it up with the other marshals in the party. And even then, it dealt less damage than was typical. Not bad damage, it did fairly well. But compared to the Barbarian and the Swashbuckler, it was behind, which is not terribly surprising. They're very strong classes for dealing damage. But compared to his monk build the way that he was, it was just not as satisfying. But it did work, unlike the Magus. So the Magus, she only had 1 round. She did get her Spell Strike off. It dealt about 84 damage. But the thing is, because she had been a Magus in 1st edition, she had still been sort of in and out of combat, dealing strikes and casting spells. And we actually had sort of a homebrew ability for her. So she didn't do any more damage than is typical for her class. She didn't have any more options. She, in fact, had way fewer options. Her spell selection was depressing for her because she's used to having so many tools at her disposal. And overall, she just was very disappointed with what she had to play with. The damage was there, but her utility outside of the damage was non-existent, and that's the big problem. So what we learned there is that with the right feats, she was able to make that class work at what it does. But unfortunately, because all of her feats were spent to do that, she had nothing left for utility, and only having 4 spell slots, she wasn't able to prepare a variety of spells. She was, for a long time, the party's only spellcaster before we got a Druid, so she wasn't just the blaster sorcerer, she was also, the one with transportation, utility options, and, casting the mansion that they can sleep in anywhere. And so not having those options just felt like pure downgrade to her, especially when the damage output was only on par with what she could already do just as a sorcerer. And so, yeah, so the overall finding is that with enough of those feats, those classes, can work. They're just not as satisfying as what we already have. So, overall, there's a lot of potential here. They're unique. I don't necessarily think that there's any problem with the 4 slots. I would probably like to see more feat options within the class to get new slots, just so that those multi-class dedications don't seem like such a no-brainer in a lot of these build options. For those of you who don't know, just a few feats can fill out all the spell slot levels that you're missing out on with that sliding number of spell slots, which, check out the video to see what I'm talking about there. But I mean, if what you want is utility and also more fuel for what your class already does, there's no 3 feats combined right now in either of those classes that would beat, a few feats dips into a multi-class, especially one that's going to potentially not only give you 3 times as many spell slots as you have already, at more levels, so that you don't feel like using a lower level spell like True Strike, for example, a big deal for a Magus, but you're burning a 4th level slot that could have gone to Invisibility or Dimension Door. What goes from being a no-brainer preparation in True Strike becomes, am I sure that's the best move when I've only got 4 slots or 6 slots, and one of them, I'm going to use a 1st level spell that doesn't heighten in a 4th level slot that, as I said, could be an invisibility that stays in effect even after I've hit somebody. I don't know. I don't think that's worthwhile. So, or the ability to fly. Is one True Strike better than the ability to fly? I just don't think so. So, definitely some considerations there, some more ways to add more spell slots that aren't as restricted. would be a huge benefit to those classes, because otherwise I just see no reason not to multi-class dedication, get more spell slots, therefore more versatility, and technically speaking, get access to master proficiency bonus in those spells earlier. So, I don't know. I'm really curious to see, when the book finally comes out, what version we're finally getting. I know that there's been some talk on the forums. I haven't seen much official from them commenting on how the playtest is going so far from the developers. We do know that they've commented a little bit about Summoner, saying that, pretty much anything is on the table. They have sort of said that the 4 spell slot is really the main thing they're trying to test right now, because they already know how a lot of other things, like if they did like a summoning font, they've already got font abilities on other characters, on other classes, so they wanted to test, other factors besides the ones they've seen how they work, which totally makes sense. We also know that based on the last playtest, the APG playtest, that they tend to go pretty extreme. They definitely seem to put things in that they know aren't going to work. I guess they just like the types of feedback that they get from that over if they provided something that was pretty close. And I mean, it makes sense from a business perspective to me as well, and take this with a grain of salt. For all we know, we'll get exactly this in the final build, but for me, if I was going to release a playtest, I'd want to release what I knew would be a less attractive version of the class, so that when the final book does come out, people aren't just saying, oh, screw buying that book, just go get the free playtest, that version's better. And you're also, not running into a situation where people who thought the playtest was awesome, and then the final book comes out and they're disappointed because now they feel like they have a worse thing than the previous one. So, you're not only encouraging the purchase of your new book, which is the whole point, but you're also not leaving a bad taste in your players' mouths when, they feel like they liked the version that existed before. So I do expect both of these classes will be significantly better on final release. We also expect that both of these classes will have a lot of feats pulled from other classes, things that are missing, like the ability to restore focus points on the Magus, for example. To restore multiple focus points on the Magus. We're also expecting the Magus to get a lot of fighter type feats, more martial feats, because right now everything is based on striking spell. And, like I said, sort of needed to get it viable. So hopefully if we have an already more viable version of striking spell, that will open up the martial options and the action economy exploits, so that the Magus feels like they have martial options, spell options, and then can combine them for the spell strike, but have those other 2 options as fallbacks when the spell strike isn't the best tool for the job, which is how a class's specialization should work. So that's the playtest so far. Please, down in the comments, let us know how your playtests are going, if you're running them, or just your thoughts in general on the classes so far. We had some fun debates over in the other one. A lot of great back and forth, a lot of great feedback from the players. Keep in mind in those comments, if I'm not agreeing with you, it's not personal, just like I hope it's not personal when you're not agreeing with me. The whole point of these playtests is to talk out and find what works and what doesn't work, so we can report it. So, in addition to, talking with me down in the comments, or each other down in the comments, make sure that you are also going over to the Paizo blog post and finding those surveys, filling those out, giving your feedback. This is something that is really cool that Paizo lets us do, and it's a great way for you to make sure that your voice is heard is by using these surveys. So, if you like or don't like something, Paizo's not going to know about it unless you tell them, and they've given you the tools to do that. So, thanks for watching the video. Like and subscribe if you got anything out of it, or just found it interesting. It really does help us out. And thank you for just being part of the community and helping with this playtest. Even if we're not agreeing all the time on what we think is the the best fixes for these classes, or if any fix, whatever. Just the fact that we're able to all talk and work together to try and make the best versions of these classes with the developer Paizo is just a really great thing and a really fun part of being in the community. And it's the kind of thing that's, why we wanted to make this channel in the first place. So it's definitely super enjoyable, super exciting time, and we really appreciate you guys, being a part of it with us and with the community in general. So thanks so much. Welcome to the collective, and we'll see you next time. Bye.